Welcome to today's webinar, and thank you for making time out of your day to join us. We'll be presenting here on semaglutide and other GLP-1s, specifically how we can use these for different types of weight loss applications, and also combine those with the latest digital health to enable remote patient monitoring, which just opens up the ability to do more precise and more consistent health monitoring, increase safety and efficacy, and be able to do it all remotely. So really combining a lot of the state of the art in peptide therapy with the state of the art in digital health technology. So thank you for joining us here. Our agenda for today, we'll do some introductions, myself and the other panelists. We will have Dr. Haas take us through an overview on how these GLP-1 products work biochemically, medically. So he'll take us through a lot of the biochemical efficacy. We'll talk a little bit about different kinds of protocols, specifically how you would want to titrate this. And then we'll talk about different protocols for prescription and then also for off-label applications. We'll touch briefly on risk factors, common symptoms, and we'll touch briefly on remote patient monitoring, which is how can we bring digital health technology into the picture and start to use that for better outcomes. And then we'll do a live demo. Everything we're talking about here will show you how you can actually implement this in practice today using Heads Up. So we'll give a live demo of everything we've talked about. And then we'll have time at the end for Q&A. So just a few quick shout outs here. These are some of the companies we work with. Heads Up as a company works with lots of different technology companies and different medical practices. So these were a few that I thought were relevant for today. Carnivore Wellness does practitioner training, among other things, on peptides, IV, exosome. I get a lot of my personal products there as well. So if you're a practitioner looking to get access to training resources, among other things, and then also sourcing, we work closely with them. And New BioAge, compounding pharmacy, they can also help you with fulfillment, sourcing, and logistics and training. Telegenics, this is a company that Katrina and I met recently at the peptide conference in Las Vegas, and they're really putting together a marketplace for peptide therapy. So if you're an individual looking to get access to a practitioner who can help you on the journey, or you're a practitioner looking to bring some expertise into your practice, you can work with them. Just a cool emerging company connecting a lot of resources in the space. And then last but not least is Withings. And that's actually the wireless scale that we're going to be talking about today in the demo. They make a very high quality set of digital health devices, blood pressure scale, thermometer. We have a direct integration with Withings, so it makes it very easy to integrate that data into the treatment program. So just a few cool companies that should be on your radar screen. We'll do some brief intros here, and then we'll dive into the heart of it. And Dr. Haas, you want to start us off just with a brief overview bio?
Yeah, sure thing. Thanks for having me on here, Dave. I think, Dave, you and I met back when I was kind of during the peak of COVID. I was doing a lot of consulting work with different healthcare tech companies. I've been involved in kind of some healthcare startup companies, all in the integrated functional medicine space. I think you and I were really interested about the use of kind of the emerging RPM in the integrated functional space. It's how we kind of got connected. But just kind of a little of my background, did all the integrated medicine training with Andrew Weil, Center for Integrative Medicine, did a lot of training through IFM, A4M, went on to do advanced peptide training with SSRP, Dr. Seeds' group, and have been using peptides alongside IV therapy in my practice for a while now, starting with IV therapy and then kind of stacking in peptides alongside of those. So really kind of excited to kind of talk about this. More importantly, kind of figure out how do we use this in the context of a bigger program, and may even kind of tease at how we can do this in the insurance world, since my clinic that I own and operate is done completely in the insurance world.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Haas. You seem to be one of the few who's cracked the code there. So we're excited to dive in on how you do that and what the RPM opportunities look like. So thank you for joining. Doc Lemansky, welcome, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, thank you, everybody who joins us and our panelists. So I'm John Lemansky. I'm the Chief Medical Officer with Heads Up. Been with Dave, I don't know, Dave, time flies, but 6 years now, I think. By education, I'm internal medicine trained physician, worked in kind of hospitalist realm, and then started my own functional medicine practice, kind of similar to what Dr. Haas does, focused on wellness, prevention, optimization, kind of keeping people out of the healthcare system, basically. Specifically, my role though with Heads Up is to try to create a platform that's kind of geared to allow providers such as ourselves to deliver like personalized, interactive, integrative care. So, I'm excited to talk about this with our panelists and answer some questions. And, I think this is a very interesting aspect of functional medicine that's just starting to grow. So it should be a great conversation.
Thanks, Doc. And we also have our subject matter expert, Katrine, on. Katrine, welcome. Can you give everyone a brief intro on your background and experience with peptide therapy?
Sure. Hi, my name is Katrine Malinsky. I work in the field of clinical nutrition and integrative practice, where we have several doctors and staff working with peptides and AD protocols, health and wellness, integrations, and working mostly in telemedicine format. So working with Heads Up Health allowed us for better patient monitoring, specifically when you're integrating multiple protocols and looking for different aspects of patient dynamics. I've been working with peptides personally for over 20 years. I am from former Soviet Union, where we're using bioregulators and peptides for quite a while. I was in Chernobyl as a child. That got me in a really sick place. By the time I was 17, I was terminal. So actually peptides were part of my recovery protocol. And ever since then, it just stayed in my life. And I continued learning and more about them and integrating them into various parts of our practice. Specifically, semaglutide came just recently in the last couple of years. And we've been working diligently with weight loss and metabolic health protocols, especially with women in postmenopause, menopause, and perimenopause, optimizing their health and wellness goals, their metabolic aspects, and specifically weight loss.
Thank you. Katrine's the brains of the operation, so she'll be answering all of the questions for you in the Q&A. So feel free to send in any questions. We have a lot of people on here. I think we had close to 800 registered, so I don't know how fast we'll be able to respond. But thank you for joining, Katrine. And if you have any questions on anything today, please feel free to plug them into Q&A or the chat, and we'll get back to you as soon as we can. So, well, I'm going to tee you up here and really just kind of set the stage for us on the GLP-1s and how they work. And that's going to set the stage to go into some of the other agenda items here. So you want to start off and give us an overview?
Yeah, for sure. I usually I tend to keep things a little high level in terms of getting too far in the weeds. I mean, it depends on where you learn from your peptides, Dave. I think you're at the World Congress with Dr. William Seeds, and I mean, he'll get down on a cellular level and yes, you can get thick quick. But I'm going to keep it in kind of fairly high level. I think some of you may have on the webinar have been using GLP-1s. I mean, they kind of been around for a little while. I remember I first started using them in residency back when insulin was the way you managed type 2 diabetes, and very early on noticed that these agents back then, your Byetta, your Bydureon, Victoza, was actually leading to like a lot of weight loss in my diabetic patients, and kind of really started to transition a lot of them off of insulin over onto some of the GLP-1s. And they've really kind of evolved over time. Obviously, the one everyone kind of talks about right now, semaglutide. Obviously, there's another newer kid on the block as well. So we're not kind of talking about semaglutide specifically, but that's the one a lot of us are tending to use now. So the Wegovy and the Ozempic, although they can be pretty hard to get your hands on the trade name world right now. But so I know a lot of people are using the compounding pharmacies for semaglutide. But kind of circling back a little bit to kind of how these things work, the way I kind of describe it to my patients, I always try to break this down in layman's terms for my patients, because, our job as clinicians is to translate this into clinical care, right? So we obviously need to know how it works on a cellular level, but can we describe how this works for our patients to get them excited about using it, feeling comfortable using it, so they actually end up using it and having the clinical results that we want? And the way I kind of describe it to my patients is a couple mechanism of action, kind of pleomorphic. And the way I kind of start by saying is, it will kind of start to regulate the appetite hormones in the brain. So, you're going to be tapping into leptin and ghrelin and starting to kind of more centrally and naturally adjust cravings and hunger cues. Very different than the phentermine or the fen-phen that a lot of our patients have been on at some point in time, where you're just kind of like revving up the nervous system to, kind of stunt the appetite. It has a very different effect clinically with patients. A lot of times you'll see patients start to lose craving for alcohol. We know sometimes patients kind of get in themselves into trouble with one too many glasses of wine at night. So it's sometimes a nice way to do that. I'll see them say kind of curves sweets as well. It's one of the things I kind of noticed as well when we first introduced the peptide. Now we can talk a little bit about titration protocols. I tend to microdose and slowly work up at much lower doses than the standard range. And I notice if you do that, you'll start to experience a little bit of the decrease in appetite and without the full-on side effects early on. Next thing I kind of usually explain to my patients is really kind of starting to work at a metabolic level to alter how you process blood sugar and store body fat. So kind of transition a little bit to kind of like liver pancreas and how the GLP-1 is working there. So it's, decreasing, the actual kind of overproduction of glucose in the liver is the way I kind of describe it. So you're dropping hepatic gluconeogenesis, and then basically telling them that the pancreas starts to work a little bit better. You have kind of this adage that over time with diabetics, you actually kind of get this idea of pancreatic beta cell burnout. And that's one of, I think, the cool things about the GLP-1s is actually helps preserve beta cell function. So, and I think in the old school, world of managing type 2 diabetes, it's, insulin, because eventually the pancreas is going to kind of give out. You have so much insulin resistant, and that really starts to break that mold, which I think is a cool aspect about the GLP-1s. And then I think the thing that really gets my patients excited when I start talking about GLP-1s is more about the lipolysis, the increased breakdown of body fat. Like that's what, that's what gets them excited, right? You're saying, hey, we have something that can actually break down the fat cells and start to utilize that as a fuel source, increasing fatty acid synthesis. And that's kind of what I think begins to get them pretty excited. If you can then kind of tell them like, hey, if you start using your GLP-1 and you're exercising a little bit more, you're going to start getting some of that glucose, taken up into the muscle cells that are using it. So you can kind of make that plug then for how this GLP-1 is also working within the muscle cells, and it's kind of enhancing their exercise. So again, it's kind of coaching them, and it's how you frame and have the conversations around the GLP-1 that I think kind of really matters. I think sometimes patients are a little less concerned, but pretty important that, that does have cardioprotective benefits, is definitely a group and category that has been looked to have, good cardiovascular outcomes. And then I think the way I typically wrap up my conversation with patients around how some of these GLP-1s work is it's going to slow digestion down in the gut. And I kind of spin that a little bit in a positive way by saying, hey, it helps allow you to absorb nutrients a little bit better. And that may be a bit of a stretch, but that allows them to kind of then start to focus on, hey, the calories that you start putting in your body are much, much more important if you're going to start having a decrease in satiety and or increase in satiety and decrease in appetite. It becomes really important that the calories that you put in your body are nutrient dense quality calories, because you're going to be slowing that digestion down. And that's how I kind of dovetail into the conversation about some of the side effects. maybe Dave, I can jump forward and circle back and talk a little bit about protocols, but
yeah, if you want to mention them briefly, we have a section on that coming up, but if you want to touch on them here, we can get into more detail.
yeah, I mean, a lot of it
later.
ties down to that slowing of gastric motility and gastric emptying, where you're slowing gastric emptying, so maybe a little bit flare of reflux. And then nausea can be a big one. I think we all know that with the GLP-1s, it's probably one of the biggest things that I see on a daily practice is the nausea. Constipation's a big issue. Usually when I start somebody on a GLP-1, especially if they have any issues with gut health, I'm usually trying to really work on bowel health, good bowel movements early on as I start to introduce these GLP-1s. So maybe that may be a little bit of magnesium at night, some magnesium glycinate at night, along with some Metamucil, maybe a little Miralax if we have to, or lactulose to kind of get things moving along early on. Of course, hydration is really important. But those are kind of some of the big ones. And then I think as you kind of titrate up, another one that can kind of stop patients in their tracks is the fatigue. Fatigue can definitely kind of be real on the higher doses of the GLP-1s. So that's kind of it at a high level, how I walk my patients through and kind of describe a little bit about the mechanisms of it, how the mechanisms then dovetail into the symptoms they might experience, and how we talk about how we might be able to prevent some of those. Because anytime you can expectation management is always better. So when the patients know what they're kind of experiencing and facing, how we can help circumvent that, very helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Haas. John, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, no, I think it's a great summary, obviously, of kind of the mechanisms of action. And one thing I just wanted to piggyback on is, in medical school and early training, we're always taught you got to increase medications. So, you put them on medications, but inevitably most people get to a point where they're on insulin because we're not really addressing the root cause. And once they're on insulin, it becomes this kind of vicious cycle where they can't lose weight. They're on more insulin because they're becoming more insulin sensitive. And this completely changes that dynamic, which I think is not only obviously important for patients' health, but also it's you can see a transition for people when they start taking these where finally they're not starving, they're not hungry all the time, they're losing visceral fat, they're feeling full. And some of the side effects, obviously, yeah, those are real and you have to address them, but it's really a game changer in terms of fat loss for people. And I think that's why it's so hard to get nowadays, because people see the benefit of it. I just wanted to ask though, in terms of the dosing, if you can maybe talk about how you do your dosing a little bit different than what the standard is, because I think that's important also to touch upon.
Yeah,
I have a slide on that, John, if we could hold that one. I have a specific slide for it. I just want to comment on a couple of things you said, Dr. Haas. One was the importance of hydration, which is something that can be easily overlooked. The other is the importance of bowel movement and making sure that's happening regularly and it's healthy. There's this metric in functional medicine called the Bristol score, which you may be familiar with, which it's like, okay, did it come out and was it like the right consistency and how often? And then also the other really important piece was making sure that the foods you're choosing are very nutrient dense. It can be exciting when you don't have the hunger cravings. I remember back when I first discovered the keto diet, the first time I got into ketosis, my cravings went down. I was full faster. A lot of these same benefits, but because the quantity may be less, it's really, really important to make sure that that's nutrient dense food. So are there specific recommendations, Dr. Haas, you recommend in terms of the types of foods you'd recommend? Obviously, high quality proteins, super important, especially for preserving lean mass. And then to the greatest extent, fresh fruit, vegetables, but do you have specific recommendations there?
I mean, it kind of depends on how much the GLP-1 stunts their appetite, right? I'm a big fan of, superfood smoothies, not using superfood as a buzzword, but, it's a nice vehicle in which you can get, I'm always talking about a healthy source of carbohydrate, protein, and fat at every meal, right? In a way that doesn't create a ton of volume expansion and the stomach and the gut, worsening the whole problem of the nausea. So, adding in, the high quality protein powders, a nice healthy fat source, be it that, your almond butter, coconuts, oil, some vegetables, some fruits into the mix. Kind of dealer's choice on how you put together a smoothie, but as long as I think you're tapping into, the 3 macronutrients in there, it's a good way to kind of get calorie dense nutrition in for somebody who's experiencing a lot of the kind of early, the satiety, nausea as a result. That's kind of my go-to.
Perfect. Thank you, gentlemen. So this is our first polling question here, and we just wanted to get a sense from everyone here on what really is your primary interest here on today's webinar. We're covering a lot of different topics, from how these work to safe and effective remote monitoring to just general education using digital health technology. So we'd love to hear from everybody on what you want to get most out of today's webinar. So that's our first polling question. I'll leave it up here for another minute or two while we move on.
Well, the polls come through. I see a few kind of questions that kind of popped through on the webinar chat. Questions about like using CGMs. I'm a big fan of using continuous glucose monitors. I mean, we're talking about digital health here. Dave, I think when I first met Dave, he was all like bruised up with it on. But I'm a big fan of using them. I actually do find some of your private insurers will cover it. I've had success with Blue Cross Blue Shield and Aetna specifically kind of covering this, and non-type 2 diabetics, PCOS,
Awesome.
using codes for obesity. They've been using it. Hyperglycemia, hypoglycemia, they'll use it. So sometimes you have to, in the payer world, really get creative with your codes. If you're in the payer world, obviously there's great ways to wrap memberships around this and just weave this into a membership program. If you want to do weight loss with peptides, digital monitoring scales, and CGMs, I know the team at Dave, I know your team kind of helps work with that as well, but I'm a big fan of using.
Yeah, we can pull that data in to the care plan as well. So I'm also a huge fan of CGM. I don't have necessarily a qualifying condition, but just as a general healthy person, I've actually found the CGM to be one of the biggest game changers, because it's just helped me learn what foods I can eat safely, which foods I can still enjoy, but maybe cut the portion in half so that my glucose doesn't go above kind of like my upper threshold. So I think for anyone, it can be incredibly accessible. They're not cheap. That's the challenge.
In the cash world, if you actually source them and start buying them in bulk, I mean, you can get them down to like $75. Which is not Sweet. Obviously not cheap, but when we're talking about the amount of information you get over a 2-week period of time, it's a great investment. And if you do it on a membership program, you're just bundling up that and the membership costs, somehow.
One more question, and then we can move on. Anything else we got in there you want to touch on?
The other one I saw, so somebody took issue to my Miralax. Yeah, I kind of gradually transitioned away from that. Actually, I was learning a lot more about the benefits of lactulose. There's like this dose titration at one of the actually peptide therapy congresses that we talked about, of using that a lot more, because it actually can help support the microbiome. So I actually use a lot more of that. We're always kind of taught in medical school and kind of residency training, using that for like hepatic encephalopathy is what it was kind of like always thought and used for. But I'm actually kind of transitioning, using a lot more of that to kind of help with bowel health, gut health.
All right, cool. Thanks, everyone.
Just go slow on that one.
Yeah, this one, John, this was just getting to your previous comment, which is what are some of the recommended titration schedules? And then Dr. Haas, if you could maybe speak to some of the prescription applications, and also a lot of the off-label applications, which are quite popular as well. And then we can touch a little bit on what kind of like pre and post lab testing you'd like to do for tracking outcomes, also for screening, body comp testing. So I'll let yourself and Dr. Lemansky just kind of touch on these bullet points here.
John, you want to jump in first? You want me to kick it off?
Yeah, I mean, we could just go through like the basic like recommended dosing, and then I'm sure most people know about it, but and then you can maybe talk about how you do it a little bit slower and kind of the rationale behind that. That'd be great. Yeah. So I mean, generally standard dose 0.25 milligrams per week, and then assuming that people tolerate that, pretty well, the standard recommendation is you increase to 0.5 milligrams after a month. Month of that weekly, then you go up to 1. I tend to not go up much higher than that. I don't know about your practice, but some people will get up to 2 milligrams per week, rarely. But I found that sometimes with that kind of rapid titration, people do have more of the side effects that you mentioned initially, the nausea, the vomiting. The fatigue tends to be a big one that's not really highlighted as much for my patients. So I agree with you. I tend to slow it down also. But what is kind of your standard, protocol?
Yeah, so I mean, I use a lot of compounded, getting a lot of my semaglutide from compounding pharmacies, because I had the ability to do those microdosing kind of ranges where you're, instead of like kind of the 0.25 milligrams, I'm definitely starting at your bare minimum 0.125. And in some individuals, I may even have to like half that. So I might be kind of starting like 5 units, and some individuals who didn't tolerate 10, but my go-to starting dose is kind of 10 units. So I'll kind of start 10 units for the first 4 weeks, and then work up to that recommended dosing range. Sometimes usually somewhere between that like 20 and 30, 20 to 40 unit range. Some people get a little bit more sensitive to it. And then I'll even kind of stair step them. I might do like a week at 2 weeks at 15, then 20, or 2 weeks at 25, then 30. For me, it's really you don't want to overshoot this. I'd much rather, and I try to coach my patients through this, I'd much rather go a little bit slower at this, allow you to get the benefits. It's still working in the background, right? You may not get the huge 6-pound weight loss per week. And then I can see at some of the higher doses, but if you end up making your patients feel like crap, they're not going to want to stay on it, and they're not going to want to go back on it. And I've had, kind of in my early use of that, when I started using the newer GLP-1s that were really effective for weight loss, you can get those side effects. Patients just did not want to continue and not return back to it because it had such an awful experience. So, I typically will start the 10 units for 4 weeks. Then, depending on how they reacted, bumped up to 20. Maybe I might stair step 15. I'll also work my way backwards if I need to, even at 10 to 5s. And like I said, at the smaller doses, that's where I usually see my patients get to the point where they are having a little bit of that appetite kind of craving, being kind of curbed early on. So they're still happy because they can see that you end up having an impact. That 0.125 milligrams. So people are asking like the unit conversion. It really kind of depends on, if you have that standard 2.5 milligram per ml vial that you're getting from some of the pharmacies. But definitely I always recommend starting at least at the 0.125 milligram range. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Also, I'm sure you do something similar, but with my patients, I'm talking to them about long-term lifestyle changes in conjunction with this. And so the weight loss is great, and obviously people are excited about it, but the goal is really to change kind of the approach to the way that they're eating and their lifestyle. And so it's, if you can create a program where they're going to be on it longer and have, benefit, but it might be slower, but without kind of the side effects, I think it's more sustainable. People are happier, and then the progression kind of goes there. And as you have that kind of curbing of appetite, I think that is actually one of the most important components of the medication, because it really helps people psychologically get away from some of the behaviors that they've had that have kind of led to the weight gain in the first place. So I'm going to start doing that. I haven't used compound pharmacies, but I think that's probably the better way to go, just based on your explanation of it.
I quite frankly can't get my hands on Wegovy here locally.
Yeah,
so
that's a problem.
I think I saw a couple of questions come in that were pretty relevant in terms of, using this when you're talking about the lifestyle things, John, around lean muscle mass. So, and this may kind of dovetail a little bit into our conversation later, which is I do a in-body scan on all my patients that kind of come through. That's actually a prerequisite to be on the semaglutide peptide. So we're always talking in terms of body composition, not weight loss. And I'm always saying, hey, I want hydration improved, lean muscle mass improved, and then body fat will kind of take care of itself, especially visceral body fat. I mean, we haven't really kind of touched on the importance that the GLP-1s I find are highly effective at help reducing visceral body fat, which is that pro-inflammatory, hormonally disruptive type of fat in and around the body organs. But then I'm kind of always sitting down when they come back in for the reevaluation on the protocol in terms of how we're going to titrate next. I'm looking at that lean muscle mass, and I'm kind of coaching them through, hey, we're losing a little bit too much lean muscle mass here, and we have to go back and talk about that the importance of that nutrient dense choices that they're making, that and their foods, and talking about protein and talking about lean muscle mass. And when I get to patients, even that are kind of starting to reach their weight loss goal, before I even kind of start talking about titrating or weaning down on a GLP-1, I am hammering home the fact that, hey, we need to bump up your lean muscle mass up a little bit before we even start that wean down process. It's going to help kind of keep your metabolism going, and it kind of gives you a little bit more metabolic flexibility when we wean off of the GLP-1.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
Yeah,
We got a lot
there's
of
good
questions
ways
for
to
the-
even measure the adipose tissue now. The DEXA scans and the in-bodies, they can give you actually a really good, accurate measure of seeing that. I've 20 DEXA scans in my life, and they have that visceral adipose tissue number, and you can just start to see it responding to different lifestyle changes. And then you made a really, really important distinction there, Dr. Haas, which is body composition versus weight loss, and making sure that lean mass is being preserved. I take Designs for Health. They have a really high quality grass-fed whey supplement, 20 grams per serving. So even if I'm not having the appetite, or schedule doesn't permit, I've always got the ability to hammer one of those protein supplements and make sure that I'm doing everything I can to preserve lean mass, because it's really more a question of body composition at the end of the day. There's been times where my weight has actually been increasing as I've made lifestyle changes. But, and if that was the only number I was looking at, I'd say this isn't working at all. But actually what's happening is that it's lean mass increasing at a very high rate as well. So it's important to look at lean mass, fat mass, body fat percentage. There's a few metrics you can look at that will give you the full picture.
Yeah, even the simplest one is just how do your clothes fit. So, I mean, Dr. Haas mentioned about the visceral fat versus subcutaneous fat. I mean, simple things. It doesn't have to get too deep in the woods for a lot of people if cost is an issue. Just simple things like
Pair
that.
of pants.
Yeah, how do they fit?
Yep. Don't need the digital health technology. Just
well, you should,
pair of
but if
pants
you can't, that's a good way to go by. So.
Hey, before we leave this slide, Dr. Haas, I know you and I talked about this briefly, but there's also a lot of use for this outside of just purely prescription use. There's applications in longevity. There's a lot of people who don't meet the definition of BMI over 30 that can still tremendously benefit. Dropping 10 or 15 pounds can increase lots of different markers in a positive way. So anything you'd touch on there just in terms of off-label application?
Yeah, I think Francis Joseph in the web chat said so. I guess BMI is out the door. And I quite frankly tell my patients that. I'm like, well, I do not care what your BMI is. The whole, and we just get done talking about lean muscle mass. The whole adage of muscle mass weighs more than body fat. And kind of focusing on that visceral fat. So when you do a lot of those body composition screens that you identify that visceral body fat, I'll find people that do not have a BMI that meet the criteria of 30 or above for obesity, but their visceral body fat score is off the chart, which is just creating, this metabolic chaos, this metabolic milieu for future diabetes, heart attack, strokes, increased cancer risk, so on and so forth. So from an off-label standpoint, when I see that sort of thing going on and somebody doesn't have a BMI above 30, I have no qualms. I think there's one question around like FDA off-label use. Do you get concerned? I mean, I have an informed consent. Everyone signs it, before using this, and kind of talks about the risk and benefits. And I believe, you never know in medicine, right? Sometimes we're proven to be wrong and something changes 10, 20 years down the road. But for right now, like Dr. Lemansky was talking about, a much better tool in the toolbox than insulin, especially when we're talking about the management of metabolic syndrome. And I think that's what we need to kind of think about of, metabolic syndrome, and not necessarily the classical definition, but you have so many of these criteria of blood pressure and body measurement and this, that, and the other. But, what is the patient in front of you looking like? And if they're trying and they're showing up to your doorstep trying to optimize their health, I'm not going to turn them away because their BMI is not above 30.
We touched on this already on your explanatory slide earlier, Dr. Haas, and in the dashboard we're going to show here on the next slide, we show easy ways for people to track and self-report these symptoms, especially easy ways just to record when it happened, because it's very easy to forget even 24 hours later. So we'll talk about how these can be easily monitored and tracked. But anything else you'd mention here, just in terms, you've already talked about titration strategies to try to minimize and how you can scale it up or scale it down, periodic lab testing to make sure
it's important to always, during that informed consent process, talk about your risk factors, right? And know your kind of black box warnings. So, I mean, we all, most of us, who've been using it, know it, but I think it's important to make sure you are always articulate that with the patient. You always document no family history or personal history of thyroid or one of the multiple, neoendoplastic, one of the multiple endocrine tumor disorders. That you kind of document that in the notes, in your note. And then you also have a kind of conversation around the acute pancreatitis and other kind of things that we know and see in the literature. Clinical practice don't see that often, especially, and I think Dr. Lansky, you pointed out, you rarely go above 1 milligram. Usually when you're kind of staying in that lower dose range, I'm not seeing it a whole lot either. But long as you always kind of talk about this before you ever get a patient started, it's really important to have that conversation so they never come back to you and say, hey, you didn't tell me about this being a risk.
Oh, well, I just want to mention that we have seen a few cases of pancreatitis. We have yet to see the thyroid, but we have seen a few through the communities that I work with that are using peptides. It seemed to be mostly affecting people that were not obese or diabetic, that had A1C and pretty good standing and were, did develop the pancreatitis, but it's rare. But it's important to monitor.
A lot more in the earlier generation GLP-1s, like the Victoza, Byetta, Badurion. I saw it a lot more in those than I am now. But it's great feedback to say, hey, even on these newer generations, you're still seeing it.
All right, so we've got a second question here, and then we'll jump into the live demo. So let's fire this one up. And here it is. Just curious about how people are currently operating. Heads Up has historically been working inside of the cash pay integrative functional wellness side, but we're also talking about remote patient monitoring on today's webinar, which is billable inside of the insurance system. And Dr. Haas, you are one of the few who's kind of cracked the nut on both. So while these responses are coming in, maybe you could share a little bit about how you've structured things.
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of a hybrid practice, if you will. So I try to do everything I can in the insurance, and part of my philosophy there is that the more we can leverage patients' health insurance benefits, the better, so they can potentially spend their money on non-insurance coverable items that are maybe going to be slow to catch up on. But there's only sometimes so much of a pool of expendable income that our patients are willing to invest in their health. From maybe through, even if they have an interest and prioritize their health, there's only so many dollars left to spend outside of your health insurance. So anytime I can find a CPT code that is reimbursable for what I'm doing, I try it. And part of it's a trial and error. I can't say I always get it right, so, but I always test it before. Like, I don't go off trying to do a bunch of CPT codes all at once. Try it on a few patients, a few different providers, and see what's working before you then end up, eating your shirt from a business financial standpoint that you come find out that they denied everything. So for like an RPM standpoint, I find that anytime you can get devices that patients are monitoring remotely that you would otherwise want them to do, and it's covered by insurance, great. So, from a weight loss standpoint, especially with your patients with comorbidities, BMIs above 30, prime candidates for having them take a scale home and hop on the scale and continuing to monitor their body composition. Obviously, what insurance will really recognize. Like, insurance is terrible about recognizing body composition analysis. They won't reimburse for it, but they will reimburse for them to hop on a scale 16 days out of the month and electronically transmit that data to you, and then pay you for spending a little bit more time reviewing that. It's something that you're going to want to do anyways, is, track that weight loss and be engaged and kind of catch patients when things aren't going well and having a conversation around that. So I find, why not do it? And then there's some things that obviously aren't covered by insurance. So, if you're talking about that off-label use of the patient who now has a BMI of 26, but the visceral body fat is really high, that's when you had the ability to potentially then offer semaglutide to them in the cash world. There's, you can see how you can hybrid it and ultimately get what's best for the patient.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Haas. And just a little bit more on the remote patient monitoring. You touched on a few points, but we won't get too deep into it. Essentially, if there's an application that warrants remote monitoring technology, a lot of these CPT codes really got cast into the limelight during the COVID pandemic, when monitoring people's body temperature remotely for fever or their blood oxygen levels became something that had to be done remotely in many cases. So those codes were there prior to the pandemic. They really just kind of got turbocharged during. And there's applications that are also here in body composition, diabetes management, and the consumer digital health technology is getting so good. We've already talked about continuous glucose monitors, wireless scales, wireless blood pressure cuffs. These devices have fantastic user experiences. They're very user-friendly. They're FDA approved. They track really, really high quality information. It allows you now to get data points coming in, not just every 6 weeks or 6 months when they come in, but there's now a continuous stream of data coming in. And that lets us do a lot of things. It lets us identify individuals who are trending out of range, potentially a lot faster before something happens. It may allow us to identify someone whose weight is coming off too fast in these cases. And with these continuous measurements, we can automatically identify these patterns. So these are the codes. There may be some other ones, Dr. Haas. These are the ones that I was familiar with last time we spoke on it.
Yeah, effectively high level, you get a reimbursement for just getting a patient onto a platform. So just getting your patient onto Heads Up.
This one here.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, now you're
connected device.
Medicare, Medicaid average of 20-ish bucks. Then you get the code for getting your patient to use it half out of the month. So that 14, 16 day mark, that's kind of averaging in the $60-ish range
per month.
And then, when you're actually monitoring 20 minutes of use on a patient, now you're getting about 50-ish bucks. And then every additional 20 minutes beyond that, you're getting about 40 bucks. So you can see that, you can, in a given month, can potentially, get 120 bucks, 150 bucks, depending on the end payer.
Beautiful. Let's take a look at how this all works in practice. So let me bring in a different screen here, and I'll do a live demo for everybody. No pressure with live demos. All right. Can you guys see this? Dr. Haas, Lemansky, can you see this? The dashboard?
We're good.
All right. So we talked about a lot of things here. We've talked about the application of GLP-1s. We've talked about some of the symptoms. We've talked about some of the biomarkers that should be used as part of screening, what you want to look for during it all. There's opportunities for remote monitoring. So I'm just going to give a live demo here of how you can actually put all of these pieces together. So this is Heads Up. This is our platform for remote health. And you can see I've got a cohort of patients here. And the system can be set up to monitor any number of vital signs, but you can see here it's set up to monitor weight and body fat. I've also put blood glucose on here, but this could be configured. So for example, if I didn't want glucose on there, that could come off. So I have access to all of the readings as they come in real time. So I can see that this individual last reading was on the 14th of December. I have the timestamp. I can also get their baselines. So I can see the most recent, trailing 7 days, trailing 30 days, trailing 365 days, lifetime average. I can see the source that it's coming in from. So I've got really good information coming in real time. That's the first part of it. I'm also able to give each individual patient their own dashboard. And part of what we want to do is help individuals learn how to engage with their own biofeedback. So Heads Up has a version that anyone can use. If you're an individual on this webinar, you can just create your own dashboard. But typically what happens is the dashboard will get assigned by the practitioner. And here's a simple monitoring dashboard where you'd give the individual their titration schedule here, where they can actually just record when they took it and how much. That at least just keeps a record of exactly when and how much, instead of relying on the person's memory or something they scribbled down. So this creates a digital copy that can be really, really helpful in the process. This is where the Withings scale is connected, and we can integrate that device. It's really simple. The Withings just gets connected to the dashboard. You can also connect Dexcom and Aura and any number of things. We can pull in a wide range of biomarkers, but for the sake of this discussion, you can just see it pulling in my weight and my body fat here. Every time I step on the scale, this comes in. We have some simple ways to self-report symptoms. And I know, Dr. Haas, that oftentimes people may feel a little more comfortable when they can just report this offline, instead of like during consults, they can just log it. They can just come in here and say, today was December 16th. My nausea was 9, and I can add some notes, maybe about how I was feeling, what I ate. That goes into the database, and that pulls through to the back end where we can alert on it. We also in our system can do the functional body composition testing. So the DEXA scans and the in-body scans can also be in here as well. So we can trend all of that data. Here's an example from DEXA, but you've got chronological results over time. So that comes in here. And then we can also do the standard lab test results. They can come in here as well. So if you're a practice, we typically can roll this configuration out. It makes it really, really easy to get all the data in one place. And it really, really helps to dial things in and give you the big picture view. So there's ability to do that monitoring, but then more importantly, what you're going to want to do is start monitoring at scale. So let's say, for example, I just wanted to look at symptoms. Dr. Haas, I've got 500 patients on this. I really only want to know the people reporting symptoms at a high level. So you can see that 9 got pulled through and gets flagged here, and we can color code this. All the symptoms get pulled in. This just really helps you figure out who may need a phone call, just based on when the symptoms are self-reported, what they were. So there's the ability to do that. There's also the ability to actually track the weight loss and make sure that it's progressing at the rate you expect it to. It's not happening too fast. It's not happening too slow. Make sure that it's working well. This could help you track the progress across the whole program. Average number of pounds lost, or average increase in lean muscle mass. So we have the cohort dashboards. And then some of the practices that we work with, actually, it's really important that their patients step on the scale every 3 days, because they really want to make sure that they're monitoring carefully. So the other reports can be set up to say, when was their last reading? So this can help with just making sure the data is coming in. So really just kind of starts with a simple dashboard, pulls all the way through to the back end, and just creates a more connected experience, which I think can help with outcomes. It can help with peace of mind, just knowing that there's monitoring on the other end. So this is one example of a configuration that we would roll out for something like this. So that's typically how we would configure the software. This can obviously be customized. So for a certain individual, maybe I also need to be tracking their blood pressure, because there's something reason to keep an eye on that. Or maybe with someone else, I'm looking to keep an eye on heart rate variability. Dr. Haas, I've talked to a few people with whoop straps who were on this and saw changes in HRV. So this can all be tweaked for each individual patient, but there's like a starting configuration, and then we layer it on from there. And then the last piece is just the RPM billing, which we can track as well. And so we've got the reporting for that. So
I think it was the cool thing that when I stumbled upon working with you, that I really liked compared to some of the other remote patient monitoring platforms, was it really allowed you to kind of start tapping into some more of the integrative, functionally minded devices, if you will, like heart rate variability. Yeah. So when you want to see that alongside everything that insurance will recognize for remote patient monitor, you can actually line that up against more of the integrative functional things and get that whole picture, but still potentially have the opportunity, if you want, and maybe you don't want, build some of that stuff out in the insurance world. But it was one of the few ways that I saw that you can do both, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that's really how we want to serve, Dr. Haas, is not just collect the medical data, but also be able to optimize the lifestyle factors. And the only way you can optimize is if you can really dial in and get really good data on their circadian sleep cycle and their heart rate variability and their movement patterns and their stress levels. So what we want to do with Heads Up is, yes, get the important medical data, but also then be able to design a lifestyle protocol. So on that dashboard, Dr. Haas, we could easily add hydration and ask people to record hydration. And also, for example, Bristol score. So it lets you get more of the lifestyle biofeedback as well as the pure clinical data. So that's our remote monitoring weight loss dashboard. If you're interested, we'd be happy to set up a call, get you a demo, and learn more about how that could work.
So a bunch of questions come through.
Yeah, let's jump over
EMR.
to the Q&A now. Now we've got some time here, so why don't we?
As you're pulling them up,
jump
the only
over
other
there.
thing I would add is, with the dashboard, you can also see correlations between things. So, HRV,
Exactly.
glucose, sleep patterns, things like that. So it gives you a better integrative look at how patients are responding to whatever your protocol is.
Yeah, I saw a lot of questions come through about
What else we
integrations
got?
to EMRs and things like that. And I think one of the cool things about this is the way you've started to build it out is it doesn't necessarily have to think about toggling between the two. Like, you have the ability to document, add notes, have patients actually correspond with you in the platform. So if there's certain things you need, Power to Practice, Charm, Cario, Servo, all these other EMRs that we classically use in the integrative world, you can continue to do that, but you have the ability to use kind of an EMR light, if you will, and Heads Up, and kind of moving and kind of teasing at the collaboration that we're working on, and taking this all the way through to actually then build this out with a billing platform that you don't have to then export this data into an EMR to have this build. You're now able to tag time usage, track time usage, and automatically assign the CPT codes and generate super bills and get that sent out, where you have the ability to kind of live in the platform a little bit. I know that's a bit of a shameless plug, but as a practitioner, I'm thinking hey, I don't want to log into multiple things. Can I use one platform for more than one thing? And anytime I can, it's a win.
Yeah, the Heads Up can exist standalone. It can also integrate with pretty much any system out there in terms of single sign-on. Katrine, any other questions you're seeing that you want to bubble up to the surface here?
Oh, I think we answered majority of them. There was questions about tapering off. I shared our experience here, but if maybe Will wants to let people know, how long do you guys take to taper somebody off of the semaglutide?
Really looks at, we always have a conversation around goals before I start anyone on any peptide, whether it be semaglutide or CJC ipamorelin or VPC 157, whatever treatment you're doing, whether it's peptides or non-peptides. You're always kind of talking about what are the goals that we're trying to achieve. And it may be some of the patient's goals, and then it may be some of mine as a practitioner goal. So they may have a weight number in mind, even though we're trying to train weight and talk more about body composition. But they may also be looking at fasting insulin, high sensitive CRP, liver function tests, and they may kind of hit their weight loss goal target. But you're like, we have some room to really optimize this metabolic syndrome picture here. It may not be appropriate, or it may not be prudent. I'd say appropriate. It may not be prudent necessarily to say, hey, we've hit some target on a scale, time to jump off. So keeping the bigger picture in mind, as opposed to just the number on the scale. In terms of the actual titration or weaning back off process, I don't think that there's a perfect science to this. I mean, I have patients who just stop cold turkey and do just fine. I prefer to gradually bring it back down as I really work hard to keep things like lean muscle mass in place, a lot of the lifestyle factors that we worked so hard to couldn't pay. So we kind of gradually, wean them off of it so it doesn't happen all at once. And I just kind of find a little bit more success that way. So if I'm up at that, 1 milligram, I'm just kind of backing it back down the way I came up. So that's kind of how I approach it. John, I don't know if you do a little bit differently.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I think we probably have similar approaches to it. Mine is, I would say, I use it kind of as an adjunct to. My goal is to kind of educate people on how to kind of change their lifestyle. So incorporate everything that you mentioned, and then, but I've noticed for a lot of people, especially if they have insulin resistance, they need that extra push. So that's what I use it for. So as we're kind of building lifestyle changes, exercise routines, et cetera, dietary changes, I'll use that to really kind of help boost them through it, and then slowly, gradually take them off of it, depending on kind of, again, what is the big picture goal. And then I always find that slow is better. There's no reason really to, if you're looking like long-term, not I want to lose 50 pounds in 30 days, but long-term, I want to make a lifestyle change. I don't think there's any rush to really get off it. So I'll back them off pretty slow, actually, for most people. And I find that those people tend to do better and have longer lasting success than people who just stop cold turkey. Those tend to have kind of more side effects at that point.
Yeah, I agree. We observed the same thing too, that you have to take time to come off of that. Another question that popped up is any other peptides you could be using in conjunction with semaglutide? I know that Leonard Pastrana was on here. He has an incredible supplements called Lucinergy, where they've shown some benefits of using it in conjunction. I mean, we've been using Motzin, sometimes NAD for better metabolic health as well. Are you guys using anything like this in your practice?
Always comes down to I think the patient that's in front of you, right? So kind of thinking about, instead of less protocol driven, what am I trying to accomplish with this patient? I think like a good combination that I see very frequently that, people like New BioAge, Create, some of these other compounding pharmacies, they'll kind of start to begin to blend some of them like BPC 157 with semaglutide. Great for a patient that you're thinking about, like, overweight, osteoarthritis, joint pain, knee pain. Like that would be like a good application of kind of stacking and mix and matching a little bit some of the other peptides. A lot of times I'll transition as well, and we'll kind of cycle from a GLP-1 over to maybe a GnRH for somebody who's now working on really trying to, we've leaned them out, but we're really got them excited about exercising and putting on lean muscle mass. So we may kind of transition over to CZC ipamorelin for a little while as an example of one. So I think it really kind of depends on like what the patient's trying to accomplish, what other comorbidities they have, where they are in their journey, their health journey and wellness goals. Yeah,
that sounds right. There was also a question about Mounjaro. That's kind of the new kid on the block. I know this is the semaglutide dashboard conversation, but I think it's important to just have a quick plug-in about this. We have been using it in the practice here as well, and just want to hear from you guys, what you have seen. Are you starting to use this? Is there certain cases where you're shifting people off to Mounjaro?
John, you want to?
I mean, I haven't had much experience with it up to date, so I'll probably.
So I've been, I kind of find it, I don't have the same magnitude of experience as semaglutide, but I have been using it over the past few months now. I find that the side effect profile seems to be a little bit less. The weight loss results are much more, robust. So, but the price is all, I mean, there's a $25 coupon that's going to expire at some point in time that's floating out there, but I always joke, I think one part with my business hat and one part with my medical hat. The business hat of mine can't necessarily justify the added cost to that one, given the fact that semaglutide works so well and we can get our hands on it at a lower price point. That's kind of how I think about it a little bit more practically. I'm not opposed to using it at all, but when I can offer semaglutide at a much lower price point to my patients and they're getting great results, I'm just going to keep using it for now.
Katrina, I'd like to just touch on a few technical questions that came in, if I may. So there's a question about adding cardio mood, Corsano. That's an integration that's currently on our roadmap. So I would anticipate that within the first half of next year. Let's see what other technical questions came in here. The mobile app, there's a question about the mobile app. So everything we showed on the web dashboard that the patient can do on mobile, connect the devices, report the symptoms, all that kind of thing. Let's see. There was one other one, mobile. Is the Withings data sent via Wi-Fi or cellular? Either one, the cellular devices or the ones on the Wi-Fi network will work. I think those were some of the technical ones I wanted to touch on here. Anything else, Katrine, that you saw?
No, I think you
that we
covered the
wanna hit
majority
on?
of questions here. I mean, there was
Oh.
specific questions about billing and insurance, which I can't answer.
Yeah, well, we touched on the codes, and we can, if you guys want to, whoever asked if you want to reach out to us, we can go into more detail on how the billing reimbursement works for RPM and other codes that are facilitated through doing this. So we're right on time here. Will, John, Katrine, anything else just in all of your clinical experience and using this with your own clients and patients that you want to just share in closing here? We've covered a lot, so.
Well, I
like
think I just
15
want to mention one more time it's so important to help people with the lifestyle change. I mean, it's such an incredible drug to be able to help people shift their weight quite rapidly. I work a lot with people in Hollywood, and unfortunately, I am seeing some really bad microbiomes, where they just using it as a weight loss and not actually addressing the main foundational pieces of why they're in a place where that they got to in the first place.
Absolutely.
Right. So use it, but also make sure that you're addressing those foundational pieces.
Thank you, Katrine.
I'll second
Well
that
said.
and third it.
Yeah, well, we'll close on that sage advice from Katrine. Thank you, everyone who joined today. We'll be sending out the recording. If you have any questions, you can reach us, support@headsuphealth.com. I want to special thanks to Dr. Haas. I know you're running a busy clinical practice. You've got a newborn that's going to be arriving imminently. So I know you're juggling a lot right now. We're just really grateful for you taking the time here today. This was really helpful and informative. So thank you, Dr. Haas. And John, always a pleasure, sir.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, everyone. Thank you for joining, and have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.